So we're here in Genesis chapter 11, and this is the famous chapter with the Tower of Babel. And what I want to focus on with the Tower of Babel in this sermon is talking about end times prophecy, because there are many, many links between the Tower of Babel all the way back thousands of years ago, 4,000 plus years ago, to what's going to be coming during the end times. And one thing we see is the fact, point number one, there's unity. You see unity and people being united in Genesis chapter 11. And part of that is with the language. Notice what it says in verse number 1. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And so the Bible's going to be talking about them all being united. And the fact is, part of that was they had one language. They had one speech. And so everybody could communicate with one another, and they'd have no problems communicating whatsoever. And so one language and one speech. And you know what? For most of human history, ever since this point, there's never been really a time with a universal language that everybody spoke, but that's been changing and is changing because English is becoming a universal language. And people that are experts when it comes to languages and things like that, they will say that English is the first ever universal language. Now here's an article from 1989 written here in the Philippines. This was written here in the Philippines, and here's an article. And this is what it says about the language here in the Philippines. So this was 32 years ago, 1989. It says, as the Philippines began to shake of its colonial masters, many of its political leaders felt that the country needed a common language as an indispensable bond for the cohesion of its various ethnic groups. Spanish, which might have played that role, never became the common language. And whatever ground it had gained toward the end of the Spanish epoch, it quickly lost to English. Now, I always find that fascinating here in the Philippines, how Spanish, it just died out, right? Very, very few people. I mean, obviously, there's some nouns that are the same, but the grammar structure is completely different in Spanish. I mean, you wouldn't be able to understand people speaking in Spanish, speaking any dialect here in the Philippines. It's quite amazing that Spanish never really caught on that much. You would think that Spanish would become dominant, and I was shocked as, I studied things in the Philippines, and then I realized that Spanish is almost non-existent in the Philippines. It's completely pretty much died out. For whatever reason, it never caught on, and then English just immediately surpassed it. Now, this is what it says. For a time, English bid well to become the common language, but with the rising nationalist wave with its insistence on a homegrown national language, its chances are becoming dimmer with each passing day. So as of 1989, it says that English started to rise up, but then basically the people wanted, a national homegrown language, which obviously was Tagalog or Filipino, and that became the dominant language. And then they said English, which was rising, kind of went the other way. And as of 1989, it says the chances of English taking over the country as the language are getting smaller or dimmer with each passing day. Yeah, but then cell phones were invented. But then people were listening to all of the American music and every American TV show and every American movie. And it's like, as of 1989, it might have been dying off, like English taking over, but it's been doing the exact opposite pretty much ever since then. And English, especially over these last 30 years, has just skyrocketed with worldwide influence as country after country after country, they watch English movies, they watch English TV shows, they listen, and here's the thing, any country will listen to their own music and their own TV shows and their own movies, but then the one other, language that's universal is listening to stuff in English. That's the way it is. I mean, whenever I'm riding with Grab or in a taxi or whatever, they're usually singing American songs on the radio. Usually that's what they're listening to. And it's just like by listening to that at a young age, it's like people pick up on English. Now, many people here in the Philippines will be often shy to speak English, but people speak English and understand English very well. I mean, most people here in the Philippines, they can understand English at least to some degree because they've been watching movies and TV shows and music. But that's not just happening here in the Philippines. That's happening all over the world. All over the world, people listen to American music. All over the world, they watch American TV shows. They watch American Idol, right? All America's Got Talent. Like all over the world, they watch, or Britain's Got Talent, right? Which is still in English, okay? And it's now in America, there's sometimes you make a joke, it's like, I don't speak English, I speak American. But that's kind of like just this old joke between, Great Britain and the U.S. What I'm saying is that, English is becoming this language that's taking over. And you're going to see in Genesis 11, we have a picture of end times prophecy, and one thing that united them was the same language. Well, never in human history have you had that ever since this event. People have spoken different languages, were not united, but now English is becoming a dominant language. Another thing to keep in mind, here's an article about Google Translate. Google Translate. Now, I love Google Translate. It's a quick and easy way to translate stuff. And here's what it says. In the 13 years since the public debut of Google Translate, techniques like neural machine translation, rewriting-based paradigms, and on-device processing have led to quantifiable leaps in the platform's translation accuracy. But until recently, even the state-of-the-art algorithms underpinning Translate lagged behind human performance. Now, I studied Spanish. I haven't in a long time, but I did a while back because I was wanting to preach the gospel in Spanish when I was in the U.S. And, I used Google Translate back then a little bit, and Google Translate was in its infancy, like in the early days. And, whenever you type something in on Google Translate, it's like they were often very far off. Just the words they were using were just not right, because when you just take a literal translation, it just does not work at all. Now that I'm studying Tagalog, many times I'll type something into Google Translate to see what it says. And, for me, at least personally, many times I don't necessarily know for sure how to say something, but if I type it in and see what they say, I can tell if it's correct or not. And then I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, that makes perfect sense. I can say this, that Google Translate is a million times better than it was like a decade ago when I was using it. Or they're just really bad at translating Spanish, which I doubt's the case considering Spanish is a pretty big language. They've grown by leaps and bounds in their ability to translate. And then you see these other things where you go to countries and you'll say something in English, you press a button, and then it will say it in Mandarin Chinese. And you can bring I don't know what they call them, automated translators for you. And it's still in the early days of that because these translators will have like a few hundred phrases memorized, but it could reach a point one day literally where you could just say something in a language, press a button, and then it will speak it in Korean. It will speak it in another language. I mean, the world is rapidly changing ever since 1989. And it's becoming to the point where, yes, people will speak and can speak, and communicate worldwide. And in countries around the world, not everybody does speak English, but I can say this, that if you look at what would be considered the elites of the country, or generally people powerful in politics and stuff like that, they generally do speak English because they're communicating with other world leaders. And at these meetings, it's in English. Right? When they have these meetings, they don't have it in French or Spanish. They have these meetings in English because they know that is the language that people know. Now, this didn't really start, though, with the United States. It started with Great Britain. If you ever look at, online, and I'm not necessarily recommending that you do this, in Daniel you have the prophecy with Nebuchadnezzar, and it talks about all of the future empires. And of course, they didn't know during that day what exactly that meant, like what countries those would be. Well, it's not that complicated in the Bible. You have Babylon, then you have Persia, then you have Greece, and then you have Rome. But some people obviously get their interpretation wrong, right? There's people that think there are other countries and stuff like that, and I'm not here to prove that tonight, but what I'm saying is this. Whenever people disagree with those four, they always mention Great Britain, because they say Great Britain was so incredibly powerful that they have to be one of those. I mean, Great Britain was a very powerful empire several hundred years ago, and they were really the ones that started the spread of the English language. Way back when countries first sent out missionaries, they didn't come from America, they came from Great Britain. But it was still English-speaking countries that were evangelizing the world, that were sending missionaries out. And they really tried to get English as a lasting language in these cultures and these countries. It's not just here in the Philippines where, it's Taglish. And as time goes by, the lish of English is becoming more and more, right? The Makalumang Tagalog is going by the wayside as English becomes more popular. In India, it's Hinglish is what they say, because it's Hindi and English, and it's just it's like this around the world though. Like that is generally the language, and in countries around the world, speaking English, you know what you would find people to communicate with. Right? If we went to another country, random country, you might not be able to find somebody to speak, other languages, but you could communicate in English. There would be people that would understand English, and you could communicate with them. That's the way it's becoming. Now, turn your Bible to, actually look at verse number 2. So part of the fact that, there's going to be unity during the end times is it's going to be on having a language that's united. And English is uniting the world very rapidly. Now, of course, when the abomination of desolation takes place, I do believe that, on your cell phones and stuff, especially with a modern day translation, they'll probably have all these things being said in Chinese and Korean and every language that there is under the sun. It's probably going to be advanced to the point where they'll, everything's going to be said just universally very easily, or you can press a button and it'll translate from English into your language or whatever, because everybody's going to know what's going on very quickly. And more and more we're getting to that point. Another thing, though, about the unity is proximity, being very close to one another in physical distance. Verse number 2, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. So they dwelled together in the land of Shinar, and they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. So what you see is this, that they're dwelling together in the same location, and they were united in the same physical location. You say, well, how does that apply to our modern days? Well, in the past, hundreds of years ago, before people traveled on planes, you could not just go to another country in a matter of 10 hours. Right? I mean, the Philippines to the U.S. is a long flight, but if you take a direct flight with Philippine Airlines to San Francisco, I think it takes about 12 hours. 12, 13 hours. Now, if you have to stop along the way, if you don't take a direct flight, then it's going to take like 18 or 19 hours. But in less than one day, you can be in a country on the other side of the world. That would be crazy to people to think about thousands of years ago or even hundreds of years ago. They couldn't have even imagined that. But it's not just the fact that you could physically be in a location very quickly, but with Skype, with talking on Facebook and Messenger. Every single Monday, I talk to my parents, which are on the other side of the world, every single Monday. And you know what? Usually there's no problems with the connection. I mean, I talk to them every single Monday, and it's just like on the other side of the world, you can call them up in a matter of seconds. I mean, they wouldn't have even been able to imagine this back in the day. They didn't even have telephones. They didn't even have the Makalumang telephone back in this day. Right? They wouldn't have even been able to imagine something like this. But yet in today's world, you know what, we have unity, in fact, of language as uniting people, but also in the fact of proximity, that you can communicate with people around the world all at the same time. Now, of course, something like this can be used as a blessing because people listen to sermons from all over the world. I mean, that's a great thing. But it's also going to be used as an evil thing during the end times. So when the Antichrist wants to make a speech, guess what? He can make a speech to everybody around the world like that, right? Look, if something major happened, if somebody, killed Joe Biden, like right now, like I'm not expecting that. I mean, I'm not making a prediction, but if that happened, if he died, you know what? Everybody around the world would know that in probably an hour, as long as they're awake when it's happening, because somebody would message them. It would be all over the news. Or if some other Vladimir Putin, if he dropped dead, everybody would know about it. If China goes to war with the U.S. or whatever, everybody's going to know about it instantly, right? All of this stuff happens like this now. I mean, we're living in a time that is different than any other time in human history. I can't even imagine, the world has changed enough in 37 years. I cannot even imagine, growing up just 100 years ago and then the way the world is now. I mean, it's just crazy how things have changed so much. Proximity is another thing. Go to Revelation chapter 6. Revelation chapter 6. As a result of this closeness and proximity and dependence on one another and things such as language uniting, one thing we've seen during this, whole coronavirus over the last year and a half is just how important that every country and every jobs are like interrelated now. And it's like you don't even realize this when you're going to the grocery store. You're just buying something and not thinking about it. But it's just like around the world, I mean, you're buying something and it's like, well, it's because someone from another country, made probably many parts of this, and then just everything's working together. I mean, the world is very united in a lot of different ways. Now, of course, we're going to see a uniting of religion, and that's going to be a big thing that's going to take place. And, I'm not really necessarily focusing on that here so much tonight, but obviously, if you've seen any picture with the Pope, I mean, if you just go to Google Images and just type in Pope and, uniting with Muslims, you'll see pictures of popes and with the Pope with the Hindus and Buddhist monks and, Jesuit priests and leaders in Islam, and they're all just praying together. And in cities and states, they're having like prayer breakfasts that are interfaith, where it used to be interfaith within Christianity, but now let's bring some Hindus in, let's bring some Buddhists in, let's just bring everybody in, right? Let's put aside all differences. There's definitely going to be unity in that way as well. Revelation 6, verse 7. And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, with death, and with the beasts of the earth. Now, verse 8 is very interesting, because if you're paying attention to Revelation 6, and I noticed this when I preached through it about a year ago, it's always using, the personal pronoun like him. It's always using singular. But then in verse 8, it says, given unto them. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth. Because what's going to happen when Daniel's 70th week is going to start is it's going to be chaos and fighting and wars, and yet behind the scenes these powers are kind of joining together, and there's going to be a battle for that power, which you can read about in the book of Daniel, as the Antichrist is going to have resistance at first. And eventually he's going to take power. But as you get to the fourth seal, then you're seeing power was given unto them, signaling unity. They're united now. It's no longer power is given unto him like one person. Power is given unto them. They're united. And of course, right after that's the abomination of desolation. So there's the unity that's going to come. And as we get toward the end times, you're going to be seeing unity that's going to be taking place. Now, of course, there is still a lot of battles between various countries, but eventually things are going to work their way together, where there's going to be a political rise of the Antichrist, and there's going to be that religious rise of the Antichrist. Both those things are going to take place. There's going to be the political rise that's taking place, which you can kind of reference from Revelation 6, and then as he gets power, he's going to declare himself to be God midway through, and it's kind of like, well, they're united, so you better get on board with what's taking place. I don't claim to have perfect understanding of how these events are going to, take place. Just as I'm sure, Daniel, as he's writing the book of Daniel, doesn't have perfect knowledge of how all these things are going to take place. We see through a glass darkly. When we're reading the book of Revelation, this stuff that has not taken place yet, we're trying our best to put all the pieces together. But there's going to be unity that's going to take place, and they're going to take power. And I think we're seeing that quite a bit in our world right now, of just basically get on board with what we say, and if not, then you're the enemy. And that's what's going to take place during the end times. Go to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew 10. Matthew 10. Anyway, it's the same way in Genesis 11. I'm sure there were preachers in Genesis 11 that were preaching against what was going on with the Tower of Babel. I'm sure that existed. Just because they don't name anyone specifically, I'm sure that those people existed that were saying, hey, this is wicked, this is evil. I'm sure same thing now. There are preachers that would preach against this, people that don't stand for this, people that don't agree with this. Anyway, it's not just independent fundamental Baptist churches. Many people disagree with lots of stuff that goes on in the world about being forced to do things and everything like that. And it's just everyday people that aren't even saved, of different religions. A lot of people realize some of the stuff that's going on, but you know what? Obviously this stuff's going to take place. It's just like the end times are going to unfold. Matthew 10, verse 16. And in Matthew 10, it's kind of a tricky chapter because it's about going out soul winning, but yet he kind of transitions to talking about the end times. And it says in Matthew 10, verse 16, Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. But beware of men, for they will deliver you up to the councils, and they will scourge you in their synagogues. Now, I know this is referencing the end times, because when you cross-reference this with one of the other Gospels, you can see that it makes a direct reference to the end times. But this was taking place during their time, but it's kind of like a dual event. During their time, they're being delivered up to the councils, scourged in the synagogues. And you know what's going to happen during the end times is the same sort of stuff that, especially even amongst religious institutions, they will take power and just kind of force you to go along with the program. Verse 18, and ye shall be brought before governors and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them and the Gentiles. And of course, during the end times, governors, kings, leaders, rulers, right? Now, there's not so many kings in today's world, but it's really just a term for being like the leader of a country. I mean, you could think a president would be the same basic thing. And you know what? People that are in power are going to force you to go along with it, or you're going to be in trouble. Verse 19, but when they deliver you up, take no thought for how or what ye shall speak, for it shall be given you in that same hour what ye shall speak. For it is not ye that speak, but the Spirit of your Father which speaketh in you. And the brother shall deliver up the brother to death, and the father the child, and the children shall rise up against their parents and cause them to be put to death. Of course, that's referenced in other places of the Bible in reference to the end times. And it talks about brother delivering up brother to death. It talks about father delivering up child. The children shall rise up against their parents. Because look, even in today's world, religion is a huge dividing point. Right? If you have different religious beliefs, bye-bye unity. And you know what? Of course, we do believe that we should hold the Bible up above anything. And I think it's good to be close to your family if you can, but it's just not always the case. And of course, the reality is they feel the same way about us because they won't accept our beliefs. Right? It's just kind of like this is what's going to take place during the end times, and then you're going to have brothers delivering brothers to death. This sort of thing. Verse 22, and ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that endureth to the end shall be saved. Actually, there's the reference to the end times, because that reference is 3 times during the Bible, enduring it to the end and being saved. What it's saying is if you endure to the end, you'll be raptured. If you are not killed during the end times, you're going to be saved physically. It says the same thing in Matthew 24, and I think Mark 13 is the other reference. But it's referring to physical salvation, and if you endure to the end, you're going to be saved because you're going to be raptured. You're not going to be killed is what it's saying. But many are going to be martyred. Right? I mean, especially when the Antichrist comes on the scene. And look, this has played out in human history before, especially in communist Russia was very famous for it. Because there was that guy who lived during communist Russia, and he became a famous author. He escaped it, but he was, in the gulags. The Gulag Archipelago was the big famous book about that and everything. And they would say in that book, and I haven't read the whole book, I've just heard various parts of it, where basically, you just have, family members delivering up other family members, where they would just turn in other family members. I'm sure during the Dark Ages with the Catholic Church persecuting people, this sort of stuff happened. If you had a family member who got baptized and you were a Catholic, it's just like the state comes in and then they want to, arrest anyone who's been baptized. It's like, yeah, my brother, he got baptized. And if you weren't willing to do that, then they come after you, which is why people will give in to the pressure. They'll just turn in whomever for their own sake. And it says in verse 23, but when they persecute you in this city, flee ye into another. For verily I say unto you, ye shall not have gone over the cities of Israel till the Son of Man be come. And so verse 23 is showing us that as we get toward the end times, it's going to be chaos during Daniel's 70th week, even before the abomination of desolation. And as I went through Revelation, I said this and I taught this because I don't believe that people are going to be meeting for church service after the abomination of desolation. It's saying you're going to be fleeing from city to city, you're going to be persecuted. I think what it's going to be basically doing is you're escaping for your life and preaching the gospel to anyone you can along the way for those last 75 days. I don't think we're going to be able to freely meet here for church service if the abomination of desolation is taking place, because every neighbor is going to turn us in, right? What you see in the Bible is you're going to be persecuted and fleeing, and you're going to be on the run. Now, it doesn't mean you're just running away so you just don't die because you're going to eventually be raptured anyway. What it means is you're just trying to preach the gospel to as many people as you can along the way, but you're not going to be able to freely just, You're not going to be able to buy and sell. You're also not going to be able to walk into a church service and expect that you're going to get away with that. I mean, the people in the community are just not going to let that happen if this happens. But even before the abomination of desolation, you see during the end times, there's going to be a lot of chaos. Depending on what country you live, it might not actually be logistically or physically possible to really meet for church. It might end up being like it would be in communist Russia, where you can meet for church, but you better make sure nobody knows about it, where you have to kind of do it undercover. Or like Muslim countries. I promise you, in Muslim countries, there are Christians that gather together to talk about the Word of God, but not openly, because they're not allowed to do it openly. It could end up being like that for many countries during the end times. It could happen to us. During Daniel's 70th week, there might be a lot of chaos, and there's going to be a lot of persecution even those first 3.5 years. Depending on how things go, it could be where we're not actually able to meet like we are right now. Who knows? I hope that's not the case, but it will be the case for many countries. It's going to be chaos even before the abomination of desolation when you read what it says in Revelation and all those things. And so turn your Bible back to Genesis chapter 11. Genesis 11. I mean, it's amazing how rapidly the world has changed in the last 1.5 years. And I don't personally think this means we're just a couple years away and it's the end times. That's not the way I believe about it. I mean, I'm not positive, who really knows. But I'm just saying one thing that's amazing is how the world can change so much, though, in 1.5 years. And it's amazing how every government around the world's been able to just basically take power and take control and things like that. Things can definitely change very rapidly. One thing you're going to see as we get closer to the end times is you're going to see unity. That's going to be a big thing. And we're seeing it with languages, proximity, governments are working together. I mean, all of these things, religions are uniting. Who would have thought 100 years ago that Christianity, the Catholic Church used to murder non-Catholics. And now they're just uniting with every religion under the sun. Who would have ever thought that? But that's what's going to take place during the end times. Point number 2, another thing that's going to take place during the end times as we get closer is wickedness and sin is going to take place. Genesis 11 verse 4, and they said, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven." And so here you have these people meeting together. And as I said, I believe Nimrod's kind of the orchestrator of this. We talked about that last week. But they're building a tower in a city to reach up to heaven, okay? And I think they know they're doing something that the God of the Bible would not approve of or that they could be in trouble for, because it says, "And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." It seems like they're worried they might get scattered, right? It seems like they're worried that judgment or wrath might come upon them. That they basically dot every I and cross every T and say, in case anything happens, right? Because this is not so far removed from the flood that they're not aware of it. People are aware of the flood taking place, and it seems like they're trying to prepare for this and say, hey, in case we get scattered, let us have this uniting name so we can come back together, okay? Now, there is a religion in Vietnam. It's called Cao Dai. Cao Dai. And Cao Dai is a religion. It's got 3 million people. So in charts of like the most prominent religions, it will appear in the top 20. And it said in verse 4 of Genesis 11, it said, "Let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven." Well, Cao Dai, the name itself means high tower or palace. And it's just interesting, all of these false religions, because Cao Dai is a new religion. Less than 100 years old. Well, it's not really new because they're building up a tower to reach onto heaven all the way back in Genesis chapter 11. The same false religions just get recycled, same thing over and over again. And it says that the high tower palace, this is Cao Dai, says the place where God reigns over the universe, the fundamental objective is the unity of all religions. That's what they say about their religion. They say high tower palace is what their religion means, the name. And it's like their high tower, the place where God reigns over the universe, and their goal is for unity of all religions. All religions they want united together. And, of course, here in Genesis 11, they're trying to build a tower to reach up to heaven. It's like they want to get up and be able to dwell up there and, where God is, okay? Now, go to 2 Samuel 22. 2 Samuel 22. Throughout the Bible, you're going to see how godly people would destroy the high towers and the high places. You see that throughout the Bible, and those are references to religious organizations and religious institutions. You see the same problem throughout the entire Bible. But here it says in 2 Samuel 22, 2 Samuel 22, 2 Samuel 22, verse number 2, and he said, "The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer. The God of my rock, in him will I trust. He is my shield and the horn of my salvation, my high tower, and my refuge, my Savior. Thou savest me from violence." And so throughout the Bible, there's all these false religious organizations that are worshiping Baal in one way or another, that have a different idol or god they're worshiping, and it will talk about how they destroy the high towers. Well, here it says that God is our high tower. Now, with Kaldai, the name of their religion is High Tower, and yet they're teaching the exact opposite of what the Bible actually teaches. Go to Luke 17. Luke 17. Luke 17. Luke 17. Luke 17 is a famous passage on the end times, and I want to show you this phrase here in Luke 17, or these statements here in Luke 17. Because what we're talking about now in this point is how the world is going to become a very, very wicked place. Okay? And so the question is, well, how do you know that's true? Because you hear people say that a lot. I mean, pretty much everybody says as we get close to the end times, it's going to be very wicked. But is that just something people say because the world's becoming wicked? Well, what does the Bible say? Luke 17, verse 26. "And as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it also be in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all." Now, there's many things that we can take away from the days of Noah, but one of the things is the fact that the world was a very wicked place. That is the entire reason why God destroyed the world, is because it was wicked. And so as we get close to the end times, one application of the days of Noah is it's going to be like the days of Noah were, right? As it was 4,000 years ago, God looked down and said, this is such a rotten and sinful place, and he destroyed it. And then basically once Noah and his family were safe, and all 8 of them were in the ark, guess what? He destroyed every single other person. And look, as it was in the days of Noah, it's going to be also in the end times. But not just in the days of Noah, it says likewise also was it in the days of Lot. Now, why does it say the days of Lot and not the days of Abraham? Because Abraham was alive during this time period. Well, one thing is it's referencing Sodom and Gomorrah, which Lot was there and fleeing for his life. Well, the other thing is this, that, obviously Abraham was a godly person, and Lot was living in a sinful area. He destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, but it's mentioning the days of Lot because it's referencing the fact a very sinful and evil place. Because where Abraham was living, it wasn't so sinful. Right? I mean, God didn't destroy where Abraham lived. He destroyed where Lot lived. And the Bible's saying during the days of Lot, just like it was in Sodom and Gomorrah, they did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built it. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. Now, people would mention the days of Noah and the days of Lot, people that believe in a pre-trib rapture, and they'd say, well, see, I mean, Sodom and Gomorrah, came out of nowhere, and it was just destroyed like that, and it just came out of nowhere. But wait a minute, the destruction came out of nowhere to the unsaved people. But if you're a believer, you're going to see the signs of the sin and the wickedness taking place. Abraham was aware of it. Now, Lot didn't know it was going to come, but that's because he was foolish. There are going to be people like Lot during the end times that are just so oblivious, saved people that just don't really know anything that's going on, or so unspiritual and stuff like that, and they don't understand how these events are going to unfold. What I'm saying is, the signs were there that God was going to destroy it because of how wicked they were, and certainly in the days of Noah. I mean, Noah was building that ark for a long time. He didn't just build that in a year. Right? If I remember correctly, I think it was 100 years. I mean, it was a long time that they were building that ark. I mean, it's not like it came out of nowhere to Noah and his family. And even though they warned people, and look, churches like ours warn people about stuff that's going to take place during the end times, but people don't take heed. Right? I'm sure Noah warned a lot of people, and I'm sure he got a lot of people saved. Doesn't mean they got in the ark, though. But here's the thing. Noah knew what was going on. He was aware of exactly what was going to take place. Anyway, before the events took place, Lot was also told about those events as well. So he knew exactly, hey, this is going to come. God warned him, right? And so look, it's not going to come just out of nowhere to us during the end times. I mean, God tells us what's going to take place. One of those things is it's going to be wicked. Okay, it was in the days of Noah. He destroyed the world. And it was in the days of Lot in the location he lived. I would presume the days of Noah were probably very similar to Sodom and Gomorrah type of world in the days of Noah. I mean, it doesn't mention that directly, but it talks about violence, which is indicating murder that's taking place. I would say rape that's taking place. I would say I'm sure was taking place, and then God destroyed the entire world. Look, just coming to church here today, it's just like passing a bunch of homos coming here, just people being flamboyantly I mean, we don't live that far away from this church building. And it's just on the way. And look, you know what? When I have kids, I got to be very careful when I have kids. It's like I don't want them around my kids. And unfortunately, that's the world that we live in. And you know what? It's going to be more and more like that in another 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 and 25 years. I mean, in a lot of ways, I feel sorry for our kids that are growing up in this world, because I grew up and had a childhood where I went outside and played sports. And my parents, they didn't let me go everywhere. It's not like I just had free reign to go anywhere. And obviously the world could be dangerous back then too. But I was able to play sports with my friends, in the neighborhood and everything like that. And it was a much safer world. Right? You hear stories like my dad will say, like in the US growing up, it's just like people would do things like when they'd go inside of a store quickly to pick something up, they would always just leave their keys in their car and have the car turned on. They didn't think anything of it because nobody's going to steal the car, was the sort of attitude. They wouldn't lock their houses at night because nobody's going to rob you. You don't have to worry about that going on. Well, that's not the world we live in now, right? I mean, that's certainly not the world that we live in now, where you can just do whatever and just nothing's going to happen. It's like, what? But that is the world that these kids are growing up in. And it's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. Turn in your Bible to Genesis 11. Genesis 11. Genesis 11. And look, we could focus or dwell on the negative aspects of living in today's world, but there's a lot of positives about today's world as well, because I believe for the purposes of soul winning especially, we can reach more people than we ever could in human history. I mean, the fact is, especially as we have vehicles, we're able to travel to locations and stuff like that. I mean, you're able to do a lot more than you used to be able to do. I mean, in the past, you wouldn't be able to do soul winning events and talk to so many people. There's a lot of negative aspects of the world that we live in, but there's a lot of positives as well. Okay? But that is the world that we're living in. It's going to become a very, very wicked place. And what we need to realize is that God is going to come back when the world is so wicked that he says, I'm going to destroy it now. That's why he's going to come back. He destroyed the world in the days of Noah because he said there was violence and it was just so wicked, and he came down and destroyed it. Okay? Same thing with Sodom and Gomorrah. The world became so wicked, or that location, and God said, I'm going to destroy them. The same thing with, Nineveh. Right? That's God's pattern. Now, look, I don't always agree with decisions like governments make and restrictions and stuff like that, but make no mistake about it. It doesn't matter what we do politically, the Antichrist is going to rise to power. I mean, it doesn't matter what we do or how many rallies we have or whatever, the Antichrist is going to rise to power. It's a vain focus for our lives. The focus should be on getting people saved, bringing people to church, teaching them the Word of God, because politically, the stuff's going to happen, and we can't do anything about it. There's nothing we can do, right? And see, here's the thing. It's not like the Antichrist is going to take power because Christians wouldn't get involved in political battles. He's going to take power no matter what political battles we get involved in. There's nothing we can do to stop that. The reason why God is going to come back is when he looks at the world and says it's so wicked, where it's just like, you know what? I've got to come back. And really, what's going to set it off I mean, the devil would like more and more and more and more time to go by. Because as more time goes by, the world becomes more wicked. He's not going to want the end times to start. Because it's going to get worse and worse and worse. He's going to already be rallying people to his side. See, God, though, says it's getting so wicked that, you know what, it's starting now. Because things like this are in the hands of God. Okay? Go to Genesis 11. Genesis 11. So point number 1, we're going to see unity. Point 2, we're going to see wickedness. Point 3, God is going to deal with it. God is going to deal with it. Genesis 11, verse 5. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. And he's saying, I just destroyed the world, and now all of a sudden they're uniting again, doing something wicked, forming a false religion and everything like that. And this they begin to do. He's saying it's going to get a lot worse. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. Now, when he says, go to, let us go down, I believe this is a reference to the Trinity that's taking place. I believe that basically you're seeing, we've seen this many times in Genesis already, but we're seeing that go to, let us go down, and basically the Lord's talking to the Lord. You know, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost. But he said, let us confound their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. So basically, they're building and everything. They're doing construction, and things are going well. It's like, hey, can you hand me a hammer? And then like a couple seconds later, it's like ching chong chong or whatever, right? And it's just like, what? I mean, this would be such a cool event to see, right? Just witness it on video where just everything's going well, and then all of a sudden they just don't understand one another at all. And it's just like, and what takes place is, I'd say a group of people still speak the same language and go one way, a group of people speak this language and go that way, and then the world divides into various different parts. And then all these and look, languages have changed ever since then as well, but this is really the start of all that taking place. Now, what language did they speak before this? Well, obviously English. No, I'm just kidding. I have no idea. Probably not a language that is around today. But then it says in verse 9, Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. And of course, this term Babel is very famous today because there's many like language programs which we use the term Babel and stuff like that. And of course we have the term Babylon, which we're getting here from Babel. Go to Genesis chapter 6, Genesis 6. So God just confounds their language. He says, I'm not ready to destroy the earth, but I'm going to basically put a stop to this. And basically he stopped the ability for them to communicate together. And what the Bible is showing is when man can unite under one language, it actually causes problems. And of course, there's going to be a uniting of language during the end times. Genesis 6, verse 4. This is, of course, the destruction during the days of Noah. And it says in verse 4, There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now, if you remember what we saw in Genesis 11, he said that, nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. And then you're seeing a cross-reference here where it says, every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And so we see that very sinful people, if they have the ability to do something, are going to do it. And it comes from the heart. Verse 6, And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. And God looks down at man, and he says, this world has become a wicked and terrible place. And God steps in and says, you know what? I'm going to destroy it. Go to Genesis 19. Genesis 19. Now, there's no question the world is becoming wicked right now. I don't think there'd be any debate about that the world is a much more sinful place now. There's such a rise of abortion over the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, it's just like murdering a baby. And it's just like, I'm sure, that was something that was basically probably unheard of 100 years ago. It's something that would have been like a shame to do something like that. But now it's a very, very common thing that's taking place. I mean, just the world is becoming more and more sinful. It's become, and I mean, just if you just look at movies as an example, a movie that would have been considered rated R when I was a kid would probably be like PG or PG-13 now, right? I mean, it's just like their standard has changed as the world has become more sinful. Something that could be PG now could probably have a lot of cuss words in it, a lot of, sexual innuendo and stuff like that. It's just like because the world is getting worse and worse and worse. And so that's just the way it is. Of course, what we don't know, though, is when God determines it's too much, right? I mean, it's up to God. I mean, I look at the world right now and say, it's pretty bad. Now, of course, I can't speak for every country in the world. I can only speak for the countries I've lived in or been to or whatever. But I can just say the world's getting really, really bad. And to me, I'm thinking, man, it seems like too much. But God might look down and say, you know what, it is bad, but it's not at the point where I would destroy it yet, because I still want people to get saved. We want the gospel to go out to the end of the earth. And of course, as technology is advancing, in many ways, the gospel has been able to spread to the end of the earth better. You look at online preaching, and people are getting saved around the world listening to online preaching. And God might look down and say, you know what, I don't want the world to end right now, because a lot of people are getting saved and we're able to start getting soul winning groups around the world started. It's just not time to end it. Genesis 19, verse 4. Of course, this is the famous story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and it says in Genesis 19, verse 4, "But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot and said unto him, Where are the men which came into thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them." Now, we're reading this because what we saw during the end times was the days of Lot. So we're looking at what the Bible's talking about. Because what it references in the chapters on the end times is that the same day that God destroyed, right? Basically, they were rescued and then God destroyed, because we're going to go through tribulation, but we're going to be raptured and then the wrath of God is poured out. That's what the Bible indicates. Same thing with the days of Noah. I mean, I'm sure during the days of Noah, it was getting pretty bad. Very, very sinful, and there was a lot of persecution against him and other people that were like-minded believers. But then all of a sudden, they got into the ark, and God destroyed every single other person. Okay? It says here in verse number 6, "And Lot went out or verse 5, and they called unto Lot and said unto him, Where are the men which came into thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them." When it says may know them, what it's referring to is, sexually. They want to force them, is what it's saying. These sodomites, these homosexuals, want to force these two angels, which they believe to be men. They use the same terminology in Judges 19, that we may know them. They say the same thing, so that's the terminology. Verse 6, "And Lot went out at the door unto them, and shut the door after him, and said, I pray you, brethren." Oh, Lot, you're so nice, right? You got these Christians today which just say, we're just so much more loving and accepting of the LGBT. And then here's Lot, "Brethren." Right? It's like you read this and it makes you sick to your stomach. What are you doing, Lot? And it's just like Lot is the one who's really accepting of the LGBT. You say, why? He's desensitized because he's living right in it. He sees it all the time. He says, "I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly." Don't do this thing. Well, what's their response? Well, then he says in verse 8, "Behold now, I have 2 daughters which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof." So he says, you know what, don't force these men. I'll just give you my daughters. Now, this story, every time you read it's just like, what is wrong with Lot? I mean, it almost seems like it's mind-boggling, right? Now, I'll say this. I don't want to go on too big of a rabbit trail, but first off, Lot had more than 2 daughters, because it talks about his sons-in-law later on. And obviously, if he's saying these 2 daughters have not known a man, well, obviously they would know. It's like, no, wait a minute, they're married to those other guys. So he has other daughters that don't get rescued because they're married to his sons-in-law. But let me also say this. Although Lot might think his daughters have not known a man, I don't believe that for 1 second. Now, I don't know if he's just saying that, or if he actually believes that because he has no knowledge about his daughters. But these are the same daughters that got him drunk and slept with him later on in the chapter. I'm pretty sure that this is not some new thing to them, right? I mean, I'm just saying you can't always trust the words of people in the Bible. I mean, in today's world, you can't always trust people's words. But Lot might think that, or he might be lying because he's in a situation where he's scared or whatever. But it's just like, he might think they're virgins, but it's just like, I don't think so. I think you're fooling yourself, Lot, if you actually believe that. Okay? But he says, I have these two daughters which have not known man. And then he says, I'll just give out my daughters to you. And they said, stand back. And they said again, this one fellow came in to sojourn, and he will needs be a judge. Now, sojourn means to dwell temporarily. So basically, Lot took up residence in Sodom and Gomorrah, but he did not intend to live there because, financially he was making money. He apparently intended to leave at some point, and he will needs be a judge. And of course, they're criticizing, don't judge us. You can't judge us, right? Isn't that what people say today? It's like, you don't have a right to judge our lifestyle. Judge not. Judge not, right? Now will we deal worse with thee than with them. So they're admitting to Lot that we're going to do something bad because we're going to deal worse with thee than with them. So they're admitting what they would be doing would be bad, right? And they're saying they're going to do worse to Lot. Now, I don't really know what's worse, except they're also going to kill him, I would presume. And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. So they come down to break the door, and they're planning to just do whatever. They're probably going to end up, just forcing all these people and just killing all of them. It sounds like and this is the result of not having any rules that stop these wicked people, because the law protects us. We don't always agree with all the decisions, but you know what? It's good that we have some laws in this country that protect us from this sort of thing taking place. Verse 10, but the men put forth their hand and pulled Lot into the house to them and shut to the door. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. So what takes place is they get smote with blindness. None of them can see, but they're weary. Now, weary means to be very tired. So they are wearying themselves to find the door because they still want to get inside and force these angels. They're blind, and they still plan to force them and kill them. It's just like, it's crazy. It's like, it's like a zombie movie or something where they've been taken over by some force. It's like, It's like, I mean, honestly, when you're reading this, it's like they're, it's crazy. They get smote with blindness. And the men said unto Lot, hast thou here any besides, son-in-law and thy sons and thy daughters, and whatsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place, for we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxen great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord hath sent us to destroy it. So what takes place is God looks at Sodom and Gomorrah and he says, it's too much. It's too much. It's too wicked. Of course, Abraham tries to, make a deal with God, and he's like, well, what if there's 50 righteous? I mean, you wouldn't kill the righteous with the wicked. He's like, that'd be a bad thing to do. And then he says 45. God says if there's 45 saved people, I won't destroy. How about 40? How about 30? How about 20? How about 10? And then, and look, I understand the perspective of Abraham. We'll preach on that several weeks from now. Like, I believe Abraham just, he didn't know how bad it was, and obviously he cared about, Lot, and he cared about other saved people. And Abraham's probably thinking inside, surely there's 10 saved people. Lot has, several kids. Surely he got his sons-in-law saved. Surely his daughters are saved. Right? Surely he got some people saved. He's been there for a while. Surely he was able to get a few people saved. Right? I don't know if anyone in Lot's family was saved, to be honest. I have no idea about his daughters or his wife. The Bible doesn't specifically say. He might have been the only righteous person, the only saved person. Right? Maybe his daughters were saved, but I don't know. I wouldn't bet on it. But it's like Abraham figures surely he got 10 people saved. But nope. Even though he had more than 10 family members, probably when you add up his sons-in-law and his daughters and everything like that, not 10 saved people. Go back to Genesis 11. Genesis 11. Genesis 11. Now, this world is wicked, but let me say, we're not at this point, Genesis 19. Genesis 19 is pretty bad. Now, I'm not saying it has to be like Genesis 19 in our country or every part of the world for God to come back. We're not at this point yet, but at the same time, there are a lot of children that get defiled in this country. And the proof of that is the rise of the LGBT. That is their method of recruiting. That is what they do. And many times, people that are homosexuals will admit that they got molested. And what ends up taking place is, unfortunately in life, many times a person who was a victim ends up becoming a perpetrator of the exact same crime. This is a very common thing that takes place. It also takes place in situations like this where kids are attacked, where what I believe probably happens mentally is they're angry about what takes place, and then they get mad at God. Obviously, these are people that become reprobates, but basically they get mad at God for what took place, and then they end up inflicting the same pain or torture because, it's what they went through. And that's why you see kind of these bizarre things. Like I mentioned one time before in a sermon, because there's this famous guy in the U.S., Kellen Winslow. He was like a pro football player, and he specifically would attack like old women. Like he would, rape women that are like 70 years old. And this was a pro football player who's just like muscular in his 30s and he's rich and everything. And then he's attacking, all of these old women, like homeless women on the side of the street that were in their 60s and stuff like that. And it's just like, what it would probably indicate is he was probably violated by someone who was an older lady when he was a kid. And then he had this, and he obviously never got saved. He became a reprobate, and he ended up inflicting that pain because it's just the way victims sometimes deal with things. Not that it has to be, not that they have to make that choice, but that is often the choice that they make. And most homosexuals will admit to the fact that, I was molested when I was 6 years old or 7 years old or 8 years old. Now, sometimes they will say that they weren't, which could be a lie, but what it could also be is the fact your mind can sometimes block out things that are very painful, where basically your mind just says it's too much to deal with and you don't even think about it. Now, I'm not sure if it's the exact same thing, but when I was playing soccer, I got knocked unconscious, and I've got like a 25-minute block in my mind, which is gone because I guess the experience was too painful for my mind to remember, where I fell on the back of my head and I was out and everything like that. But it also happens with stuff, not even when you're just knocked out or whatever, where basically your mind will block out things that are too painful. You don't always remember, especially if it's happening to someone at a very young age. Your mind might block it out or it might become fuzzy as time goes by. But that is happening in Sodom and Gomorrah, where young kids are being violated. Now, Genesis chapter 11, we'll just close up through the rest of the chapter. So the bottom line is there's going to be unity, there's going to be wickedness. We certainly see that. But at the end of the day, God is going to be the one who determines when to deal with it and how to deal with it. And the only thing I would hope and pray for is just that we here in the Philippines have free reign to preach the gospel and to serve God and raise our children, and that our children will be safe in this crazy world. That's what I hope and pray for. And it's not necessarily going to be like that in every country around the world. We can pray and hope that we have free reign to preach the gospel and serve God and just have, even if things go crazy in other countries with this sort of wickedness, hopefully we'll still be able to serve God and our kids will be safe. But it's going to be a crazy world coming up. So the other thing in Genesis 11 you see is ages are decreasing. You're going to see that in Genesis 11. So before the flood, people were living 900 years, and they never lived past 1,000 years. Methuselah is the longest living person, at least as far as we know, unless there's someone else in the Bible, or that's not mentioned in the Bible. But we see that the ages start to go down as time goes by, and whether or not that was done divinely, or whether or not there was some sort of change in earth from what caused the flood, which is possible, that would cause, people's life to slowly go down. But nowadays, and for a long time, it's basically 70 to 80 years, unless you live in cultures with a lot of sicknesses and diseases or something like that. Genesis 11, verse 10, these are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he begat Arphaxad 500 years and begat sons and daughters. So 602 years old is Shem when he dies. And Arphaxad lived 530 years and begat Selah. And Arphaxad lived after he begat Selah 403 years and begat sons and daughters. So he lived to be 438 years. And Selah lived 30 years and begat Eber. And Selah lived after he begat Eber 403 years and begat sons and daughters. So you're looking at 433 years. And Eber lived 430 years and begat Peleg. And Eber lived after he begat Peleg 430 years and begat sons and daughters. And Peleg lived 30 years and begat Ruah. And Peleg lived after he begat Ruah 209 years and begat sons and daughters. So you're down to 239 years. And Ruah lived after he begat Serug 207 years and begat sons and daughters. And Serug lived 30 years and begat Nahor. And Serug lived after he begat Nahor 200 years and begat sons and daughters. We're down to 230 years. And Nahor lived 9 and 20 years and begat Terah. And Nahor lived after he begat Terah 119 years and begat sons and daughters. 119 plus 29, we got 148 years. So it went through a bunch of names, and it went from 602 years down to 148 in 14 verses. And of course, at this point, you can pretty much divide that by 2, and 74 years is about a typical lifespan, obviously depending on where you live and various factors, but on average is 70 to 80 years is what the Bible says. It's already down to 148 years here, though, in verse 25. And verse 26, and Terah lived 70 years and begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran begat Lot. And Abraham, you see, or Abram at this point, is the uncle of Lot. So this is his brother's son. So Abraham is his uncle. And he doesn't always call him, he refers to him as his brother sometimes, but, sometimes brother can refer to the same ethnicity, but within families, they would often call someone their brother if they were a cousin or something like that, or an uncle or nephew or whatever. It's a terminology, just kind of close kinship. Verse 28, and Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees. And Abram and Nahor took them wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren, she had no child. And so the Bible is defining, what barren means. And obviously it's going to talk about Sarah later on in this book. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife. And they went forth with them of Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. And they came unto Haran and dwelt there. Now, next week I'm going to kind of talk about that. I don't really want to get into it for sake of time. But verse 32, and the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So we'll start to develop all those things in the next couple sermons and everything like that. The main focus is about the end times, and that the Tower of Babel is a great picture of the end times. You see unity, and you see wickedness, and when it becomes to a point where it's incredibly wicked, God says, no, I'm done with this. It's going to be the same thing during the end times. We do see a uniting of people together, and religions and cultures. Religions are telling you to put aside all differences and join together. It used to be the Catholics and the Protestants and Orthodox were enemies with one another. Now they're friends. It used to be that the Baptists would take a stand against other denominations. Now they'll invite anyone to preach at their pulpit from other religions. It's like no big deal. And it's like putting aside, Now I know this is happening in the U.S. where Baptists are becoming very, buddy-buddy with Pentecostals even. And it's just like it didn't used to be that way. But now everyone's just joining together. And even with the Catholic Church, they used to be basically against all these other ones. And everyone was against. In America, when John F. Kennedy became the president, he was the first Catholic president. It was like a major talking point during the election. Is it possible for a Catholic to really get elected president in the United States of America? People didn't think it was possible because the U.S. was built on being anti-Catholic when they started because they were sick of the oppression from the Catholic Church and taking rule and forcing all these things. And they were very anti-Catholic Church to the point the Catholics really weren't welcome in America when America, took over and won in 1776. But of course, time goes by and things change. Now we're seeing a unity of all of these Christian religions. And then also we're inviting Muslims and Hindus and Chrislam was the thing they're talking about with Rick Warren about let's talk about the things we agree with Islam instead of focusing on our differences and stuff like that. And then, of course, you're seeing wickedness. I don't think there's any question. I think everybody would admit that this world is becoming worse and worse. It's just a matter at what rate. But the bottom line is God will deal with it when he sees fit. And that could be in 10 years. Could be in 20 years. Could be in 100 years. We might all be gone by the time the end times come. I really don't know. It's really hard to tell. Let's close in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us to be here today and getting to see your word on this topic. And help us just to try our best to serve you here in the Philippines and in Pampanga, God. Help us to get as many people saved as possible. We ask you to help us bring more people to this church, to be able to have more soul winners and more people that love you, God. Help us to reach this community. And we just ask for your special blessing